everyone. This is Blake Allen here with Around the Bend podcast, Ep.7. And I have the pleasure of having Ken Atkinson from Kaiser Permanente.
Good to be with you.
Perfect. Yeah, I was really happy that you took the opportunity to take some time out and talk today. Just to give a little background, Ken is really on the strategic operations side at Kaiser Permanente. And a lot of the guests we have on here talk about like different IT infrastructure, different software development projects and technologies that people see coming up. And that's why I called it Around the Bend. Why don't you delve a little bit into your background?
And great name for the podcast, by the way. So a little bit about myself. Civil structural engineer by training, been through multiple industries on a couple of continents. And I've come from a consulting background through industry and now landed in healthcare IT for the last little while. So current role is Senior Director of IT Infrastructure at Kaiser Permanente, as you mentioned. I'd say my current focus at the moment is really about bringing operations performance management to the fore, getting visibility to all those objectives and key results. That we need to show progress, right, and alignments with goals and strategy. And I think that's the key theme through a lot of things that I've done is aligning strategy and execution, crossing that bridge between the business and technology, making sure we're aligned.
And, being a customer of Kaiser and just seeing how large they are, also them being one of my clients, what would you say of an organization of that size? Like what kind of complications maybe do you have there that you didn't have or maybe had in past kind of experiences?
Joined healthcare, I was always, hearing the news, oh, healthcare is so different, you need healthcare experience, etc. And I think the perspective is companies feel they're different. I definitely have seen a difference in Kaiser. And I think I put that down to the scale. It is a super large company, over 220,000 employees, 800 hospitals or so. So I think the one thing is complexity, right? There is a significant complexity factor at play. Scale is large. Also, the way we operate, we're still a little bit regionally based because as a care delivery organization, or that part of our organization, we're a payer and a provider. But the care delivery side really is locally focused with local doctors, regional doctors groups. And so there's a need for standardization. They still drive their own practices at large. And so with that diversity comes the need for change management in the efforts we do and to align those teams. So really, from a challenge perspective, I think it comes down to complexity, scale, and the politics of regionalization.
Yeah. No, I've seen that not only with Kaiser, but with other like healthcare systems we work with. There's a lot of older systems that like not only the technology, but the business systems that are in place, the business organizations, and those do not change quickly in the healthcare space. And actually, just to back up a little, just for some people that maybe don't understand because they don't work in IT.
Multiple different definitions of change management, depending which audience area you're coming at it from. So in the strict IT sense, change management is managing software promotions into production. So from test or development into production and making sure that you're not introducing bad changes into a operational environment. That's actually not what I'm talking about here. So it's a great question because I'm referencing how you drive organization and cultural change alignment around new efforts, new technologies, new processes. So helping the human aspect of change progress.
I see. That's good too, because there's a lot of people that watch my podcast that are more in the engineering side of things, and maybe they have a different, different perspective or idea, and that's why sometimes I always like people to clarify. And one funny thing too is Kaiser is so large, and kind of talking about that organizational structure and how things are. Every organization I feel like is a little unique. They have their own flavor, and apples. It's not apples and oranges. It can be very different things.
Very true.
In every organization,
I think, and that's a great call out because part of leading an organization, I think, is understanding what the local terminology is. The underlying tenets are very often quite similar. the principles, practices, running a business, running IT are very similar, but the terminology changes over time, whether it's IT or digital, whether it's change management or cultural advancement, different terminology. So you just have to tap into what the local landscape looks like.
And I think we talked about that, and anybody listening in, don't get upset, but all these there's no such thing as IT anymore. It doesn't exist. Now everyone turned into digital transformation or business transformation, or I've seen some weird ones out there, business, digital growth, all kinds of new fun acronyms. The same with engineering. I just feel like everybody wants to have their own new title nowadays. So I guess kind of going into it, what's like, because with COVID and all these things happening over the past couple of years, what do you see, maybe not just like in health IT infrastructure, because you're more in the strategic position, what do you see maybe happening in the large enterprise space as being some of the biggest changes on the infrastructure side from your
big advances? Obviously, cloud has been out there a while. One of the reasons I came to healthcare was because I think that the healthcare industry has a way to go to catch up, standardize, interoperate, etc. And so when I talk about cloud in healthcare, we're behind the curve compared to SaaS industries and software product industries. But I think the big move for healthcare is definitely getting data privacy in the cloud, interoperability across the various platforms. And I think the other big factor that's coming through, and we saw it with COVID, and we've seen it in all of the other social media kind of advancements, is the consumer, in our case, our members, our patients, have so much access to information on their phone, right? Your phone is everything in your pocket these days. And so they want the convenience of being a consumer of healthcare and thinking and being treated the same way. And so being able to, you mentioned it earlier, digitize, get everything on that phone, make it easy and simple for our members and our patients to interact with us, I think is clearly something that's critical going forward. So digitization, interaction, access to data, and leveraging the data for the benefit of the customer.
I think that's an interesting point you're making too, because it's kind of funny. Over the past couple of days, I was at the Modern Data Stack conference, and one of the things that people were talking about is like not only in the workforce, but just in terms of expectations around technology with Gen Z now. It's funny now that I'm no longer, I'm only 26, but now even I'm like, my expectations are a little bit different. When I was growing up, it was, normal. You call, you go to the doctor, whatever the doctor tells you is correct. And I feel like now I've been seeing so many new things, even with Kaiser, like the video call with the doctor. And I'm like, I don't know, it sounds weird because I've grown up with this stuff, but it just like, it's just such a different way from the way I was taught and brought up and what I'm used to, that it begs the question, like, what's next and what's coming? Like, because we're talking about healthcare, we can kind of continue down this path. But what do you see being some of these big changes?
Element out today is AI, right? So ChatGPT, artificial intelligence. You had to, right? It's going to come up everywhere we talk today. But going back sort of half a step, I think machine learning, artificial intelligence, the fundamentals, even the simple things like chatbots and making workflow easier, automation, those are definitely coming into healthcare to drive costs down, which is a major factor in the U.S. healthcare system, obviously. And then when you layer on top of that, you mentioned earlier, so much information. You'll Google your own symptoms and double check your doctor. AI.
But that's not always a good idea. WebMD will always tell you have cancer.
But on the ChatGPT side, on the AI side, there are currently efforts underway by some very major technology players in the country to leverage that technology into the healthcare space. So obviously, even here at Kaiser, we already can diagnose hundreds of conditions through video conferences and video chats using AI, confirming, do you have pink eye? Do you need to see a doctor? Take a picture of your eye and have a look at it and share that with your doctor. And the software will actually help you sort of self-diagnose based on its history of how many pictures of eyes it's seen and what the outcomes were, because we have that data. But taking that a step further, AI can go out and look at the entire patient record. It can look at the entire body of medical literature, and it essentially can double check the doctor. And it could say to the doctor, hey, it looks like this patient has X, you just diagnosed Y, are you really sure? Or, hey, you misdiagnosed or are prescribing this test. We think you should apply this test because maybe the diagnosis is going in a different direction. Going back to change management and the human elements of change, that's really sensitive to negotiate or to get through in a healthcare environment, because the doctor is such a powerful member of that team, is trained. You don't want to undermine that patient-doctor relationship. You've got to be sensitive in the room. You can't have the software second-guess the doctor live real time. The patient will lose faith and trust. The doctor may get upset. So it's tricky to negotiate that process, but the technology, the artificial intelligence can definitely improve patient outcomes and the accuracy and the efficacy of care by getting the right test, the right diagnosis first time, rather than multiple treatments and tests that disrupt everybody and cost a lot of money. So I think there's a future there that will come at us a lot faster than we probably realize.
I think that's an important point you're making, because definitely my personal experience, I work with a lot of law firms, and I was actually talking with a founder, or actually not a founder, an executive at like a startup who works with a lot of medical practices, like smaller medical practices. And there's this, I won't say a standoff, but sometimes people don't like the answer they receive, and they're professionals. Right. They're very intelligent people, they're masters in their field. And sometimes when you contradict their set understanding, it can create conflicts.
Yeah, implementation put, but that's exactly right. Yeah.
I guess more bluntly, it's like, the people are very smart, so they think they're smart in every category, but sometimes we all get stuff wrong.
As I mentioned, AI can look at millions of interactions. A doctor may have seen tens of thousands, and, Malcolm Gladwell say 10,000 hours makes you an expert, but AI could go out there and look at 1 million hours worth of experience, right? Or more.
Exactly. And we're just at the baby steps. So, I mean, I feel like we're just going to end up talking about it anyway. So like ChatGPT, just a couple of weeks ago, I was, asking it questions, and it would produce these really interesting, like especially questions for like reports. And it would produce like something that would take me 15 minutes. It did in like 2 minutes. Right. You know what I mean? And then now GPT-4 is a level above that. And they're apparently going to release GPT-5 in December. And I'm like, it's every day, it's exponentially getting better every minute, every second, because it's not sleeping, it's not eating, it's not like a scientist, like humans have a lot of inefficiency. And this is just like, imagine hundreds of thousands of human brains operating as one, and they're all like just aggregating data and course correcting at all times. Like, it's cool. I mean, everyone says, well, it's cool, but it's scary. And it's maybe, that's a really good vision of making the doctors better, not undermining them, making them better. And I'm sure there's many different, of course, applications that we're not going to be able to see right now, whether it's cancer research, medical research, those sort of things. In your own like past experiences, are there any other fields that you worked in where you could like see like, oh wow, this is going to really just blow things out of the water?
I think some fields that are potentially ripe for disruption, even something as, I wouldn't say mundane, but as professional as consulting. If ChatGPT can go out there and draw the best strategic plans from similar companies, it could undercut, not necessarily do away with. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think it's additive, but it could shorten the cycle times of consulting engagements, which would save companies costs. The risk is it starts to parlay best practices. Everybody starts to look the same, right? So the consultants can really tailor something, but getting that input early can maybe speed them to a recommendation. So I think it could really disrupt that.
Hmm.
I also have experience in insurance, and I think that's an area where technology's been used for underwriting purposes for years, right? Uh, Not ChatGPT
Mm.
itself, but artificial intelligence, the intelligence and machine learning to really understand the patterns more dynamically, I think could really change that industry
Hmm.
and drive better pricing as well.
Yeah, I would enjoy that because when I buy a new car, I mean, I have an insurance agent that I like, but every time, if they switch my rates and I try and switch to another one, I'm like, shoot, I gotta like talk with like 10 people and they're all gonna, try and negotiate some deal. And then I just feel like it gets like used carsy. I used to sell used cars. I'm
But
like,
I
I just
think
don't like that
the
process.
bigger risk actually to at least the auto insurance industry is, I think I saw yesterday or the day before, Bill Gates mentioned he thinks it's about 10 years to fully autonomous self-driving cars. Now, we've heard statements like that for a while, obviously, but we're seeing the improvements. The risk to the auto insurance companies comes when cars are safely fully autonomous, because human error is a factor in 90+% of accidents. And so if you don't have accidents, you don't
100.
need insurance. So that
Yeah.
kind of goes to zero. It'll be very interesting to see how that plays out over time.
Wow, that's actually the first time I've
The
heard.
liability, but does the liability
That's
shift
like,
to the car? Is the car an entity? Is the manufacturer a liable
mhm.
entity? So that's really going to disrupt that industry.
Mhm. That's a I mean, yeah, even my brain is just like, I'm like, no one's ever actually said that to me. And I'm like, actually, that makes a lot of sense. The, so I guess, I mean, being a consultant, doing consulting in the past, like what did you do in your kind of like previous
Yeah,
experience
so
there?
wide spectrum of work across multiple industries, largely in telecoms, network, and high tech. Process-related change. So I
Mm.
did strategic planning for major telco companies for like technicians of the future programs, bringing technology into how their workforce can manage their networks. Implemented large shared services systems, did claims transformation, claim center relocations, built software blades for network discovery companies, uh, helped a major web hosting provider offboard all of their assets and maximize the value of their assets when they went under. So it's a wide spectrum of work across
Mm.
multiple industries. Most of the time, just driving improvements. I actually, an interesting one was I implemented these TSA wanding corrals in Anchorage Airport as a part of a pilot program to launch all of those.
Huh.
So it runs everything from technology to process planning to large multi-million-dollar business cases and billion-dollar program management kind of activities.
No, that's pretty interesting. And I mean, even on our consulting side through Protivity, they're always kind of tackling different problems. And at the end of the day, it's like building solutions. So I have a similar kind of experiences, especially lately. I've noticed people are not as interested in staff augmentation as they are in just outsourcing this work or like having everything
Yep.
ripped out and redone in a better kind of process. And not to put you on the spot, but are there any of those projects, because you were talking about how AI could really revolutionize consulting, are there any projects you could think of where you're like, imagine you have this fully functional chat GPT-4, how would that have changed your deliverable, or how do you think you could have like gone above and
Yeah,
beyond?
that's a really interesting question, Blake. There, yeah, no, I think there's
I
probably a
had to
couple of
put you on the
different
spot.
scenarios where it could play out, right? Uh, Potentially in selection of software, if it could go out and find comments and you know recommendations on software. So I led a very large, complete enterprise strategic transformation program right from the very selection phase. So I was given 60 days over the holiday timeframe as a new employee of a company to basically come up with this
Oof.
$400 million transformation program and select a vendor, not knowing anybody in the company. Thinking back on that, being able to leverage Chat GPT and ask questions and get quick responses about approaches, techniques, trade-offs, frameworks, might have really accelerated or even accelerated that further, or maybe produced a better result. And another example might be, early in my career, I actually redesigned the cell phone activation process. So most folks today probably don't think twice about it. You're upset if you pick up your cell phone from ABC, pick your major provider company, and it doesn't work right off the bat. The guy transfers all the data right there, unless you do it yourself. You walk out the store, you've got a working cell phone, right? When the bricks first came out, you would wait 6 weeks to get that thing active. And most people today are like, wow.
Really?
And what I did on my team was I analyzed through interviews and discussions every potential path and hurdle to get those devices activated. And then you could look at the frequency of every decision, and you'd come out with 65 different paths to an activation or not. But 80-20 rule applies. There's probably only 4 paths that are the majority of the time. So which are the major pain points to really solve to fix that problem as quickly as possible? And I think AI and ChatGPT may have had some answers there with regards to what's the most common cell phone activation issue customers are facing today. Which methods might be best suited to improve cell phone activation? Those kind of questions I think you could ask. I'd be interested to find out. I don't know that I know the answer, but I'd be interested to know what it comes back with in those situations.
Or, because I used to work at Verizon, so it's actually funny you mentioned that. That was like one of the most frustrating things, especially if I got a business order of like 20 lines, and then they're like, we have to activate them in store. And if everything went well, it would just turn on, activate, do all that stuff. But a lot of times it was like rolling the dice. Like there was like a 75% chance it would activate.
Yep.
So we had like even now or 2 years ago, they had still like somewhat of a failure rate. But I'm thinking kind of like we have a similar maybe situation at Robert Half where you have, let's say you bring in that full data set. You have all that customer data or all these pathways, and you give it time to analyze. And actually, it was interesting. When I was at the conference this week, there's these new startups that you put all this information to like your data lake and then your data warehouse. And then there's tools that like sit on top of your data warehouse, basically like with AI, that are trying to draw out the right insights, so it's combining all that into your data pipeline to the AI algorithms and all that stuff. I would be very interested to like how fast could it do what you guys probably were manually reviewing, reading, back in that time.
I mean, another thing, go ahead.
And even like now, Robert Half, they're building an AI tool where we have probably tens of millions of resumes coming in, and they have an AI tool that helps recommend certain candidates to certain roles that are open. And that was actually what they were talking about, the modern data stack, and ChatGPT is probably throwing this on its head right now because these companies have been established, they're like 3-4-year-old companies, but now how is this gonna change that infrastructure with ChatGPT, with these tools? And I don't know, it's just, there's so much change. It's like even my brain, like the past couple of days, I've been like trying to really
make right. So it's hard to even envision what the next generation looks like because it's 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times. And so this pace of change is just incredible. And you bring up an interesting topic because I'm a big believer in going back to kind of the roots of the area I work in around performance management, planning, program and project execution to achieve these strategic objectives. A couple of things come to mind. As a PMO type leader or anybody who's driving major programs, you would want to know what the most repetitive, sort of chronic issues and risks are in your environment so that each project or each delivery is not solving those, but you can solve them enterprise-wide. AI might be able to discern those more quickly than looking across multiple project risk logs. And then secondly, the other thing I'm a big believer in is giving people the tools to do the work they need to do in the way that best works for them. There's this era of standardization that we've been through where everybody has to use tool X. And why do we use that? It's so ultimately that we can get good information about progress, about operational conditions. But sometimes forcing people to use the tool to meet that end isn't really the right connection. give people the right tools. Let there be a diversity of tools. Cost management licenses, is a consideration, obviously. You don't want to have too many. But if there are micro uses of tools, let those be out there. Then, as you said, bring that into a data lake and use AI to pull out the information in a mapped way so that you're getting the information, because that's the ultimate objective. It's about the info. It's not about how you're managing, the work. And so I think it's the reporting engines, the analysis engines on top where AI can really help and progress those.
No, that's a really good point, because I'm sure that you and I see a similar thing at the enterprise level. It's much more strict when even just to get a tool approved is quite a process. And that's why there's startups, obviously, but sometimes too, the business factors, like what is the cost of these tools? What's your spend? What's the team's, goals? And I think some companies, like, they get a lot of tools from, let's say, Amazon or Microsoft because they're given an extremely good deal on those tools, right? Even if they're not going to complete the overall strategic goals, you're not really going to get certain other things working the direction you are. There's an attitude that I've seen when I worked at Verizon, and I've seen with other clients, is just like, well, it is what it is. Let's deal with it. And that's how it is, and that's just, that's a very common
regulated industries. I've worked in public and private and in partnerships. I've worked in regulated and non-regulated and in for-profit and non-profit companies. So a broad spectrum. And what I see is that in the regulated side, obviously you have to really take care of meeting the compliance needs. So audit compliance are major factors in those companies and are sometimes driving factors for how businesses is run. But that can be a brake on progress. And as you said, that's why you've got startups, right? On the other end of the spectrum, you've got the Wild West, the startups, and flaunting the edges of laws and ethics even sometimes. But I think AI could help find a happy medium, because regulation, again, to my points on reporting and operations, regulation is about a certain set of objectives and protections. It isn't just regulation for regulation's sake. So maybe AI can find ways to meet those objectives, but be a little bit more creative and fluid and catch those red flag conditions that are really meaningful and material to the business. And you might take a little bit more business risk in some areas of regulation that are of low consequence. It's not an all or nothing approach.
That's actually, no, that is a good point, because I feel even yesterday we got like a warning email, like, hey, be careful using ChatGPT and Bard, like, as a company-wide warning, because kind of going back on privacy, like, one thing people are not, I feel like they're not really concerned about the privacy issues. And it's like, technically, anytime you put something on ChatGPT, Microsoft or OpenAI, whatever you want to call them, owns that information. And I'm seeing, like, I don't have a coding background, but I'm seeing people use an unlocked form of ChatGPT to basically do coding or write massive amounts of code with people that have no coding understanding or very basic. And to me, that's kind of, it's making me think like, oh, could I build my own app if I just mess around with this? But if you do, they own that. You don't own any of that.
On top of that, what kind of biases or invisible business rules might you be introducing into the code without even realizing
it? Something that'll benefit Microsoft.
or expose you or them to litigation if you find that you've built something that doesn't quite comply.
Oh, that's actually a very good point. I didn't really think about that, because it is, at the end of the day, it's just a tool. And I think one of the obvious, like, even me messing around with it, it's like, well, it's making what it thinks is best. Like, I put in a series of questions, like, how is this person's performance this quarter? And it said this year. And I said, remove the word quarter, remove the word year. And if I hadn't read it and checked, it would have just not made sense for that specific situation. So I think it's maybe good for, like, really general things right now, but until they make a version, or there's another competitor that comes out with a much more private version where it's like, hey, you own everything that comes out of this system. Because if you ask it maybe, oh, what's the best, cloud lake? They're going to say, oh, Microsoft Azure. And you're like, oh,
you make me
weird.
think of the Linux world, right? So Linux comes out, little penguins there,
Mm-hmm.
and it's open source, and everybody's happy. And over time, people start to realize that there's both pros and cons of that, and you get a company like Red Hat comes along and kind of formalizes or organizes something. I can see a vision or a future that goes the same way with ChatGPT or AI, where I know Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
OpenAI, that big relationship ownership situation now, but either they or somebody else comes along and carves off a piece, a functional area or a technology or business focus of that, and starts to layer on certain specific elements on top of that to make it more robust or operational or secure, as you mentioned.
That is a great
There you
idea
go.
for some kind of startup, my friend. But there's so much yeah, I'm just kind of wondering because right now all the companies have some version. I don't think that ChatGPT is like,
Yeah.
of course, the only thing out there. There's so many options that exist, but I just don't think they've been released out into the wild yet. I just saw this morning, right before we got on this talk, that Google is now integrating their AI system into Chrome, or it's like an extension you can put in. So it's like there's going to be some like AI arms race, and then Elon Musk comes and says, "Oh, we really should put the kibosh on this for a while." And then it's like, well, it's too late. The genie's out of the bottle. But it's kind of scary if they're like, "Hey guys, we actually maybe shouldn't have released this." It's like, why? Like, what do you think the dangers of? Why would they say, "Hey, maybe we need to rein our own product back in"?
I think every new technology obviously has the risk or the potential for nefarious uses, right? And society, unfortunately, has real challenges in separating those from the good. You think, all the way back, you could go, back to the nuclear arms race, right? And terrible uses, but nuclear power can maybe sustain some things. You could even argue that the nuclear arms race created a measure of stability for a while because of this mutually assured destruction. Then you get to the internet, major new tool comes along, and suddenly you've got Napster and access to all kinds of incredible information, and now you're talking about digital layers on top of that and easy integration on your phone. But at the same time, you have social media and all of the well-documented challenges and issues and opportunities for disruption and conflict, stoking conflicts and creating differences between whichever group you want to choose, whichever country you want to choose. There's a lot of this geopolitics at play in this environment, and organized crime. Organized crime is taking advantage of these tools, right? You can buy credit cards on the web. The tools make that easier and easier. You've got hacking kits that you can just buy as an individual. It's an industry. So every tool has its bad side, and I think AI has those same risks, right? You could use it for really bad purposes, but if we start to find the right controls and uses and educate, I think it's a major challenge to educate people on the opportunities the tool brings, but also where those risks are. We could make something good of it. We talked earlier about how it can improve healthcare. Those opportunities are there, so we shouldn't put something aside just because it has the potential for disruption. We would stay back in the dark ages if that was the case, and I think humanity has this inherent ability to keep adapting and find the good, even though there are those bad players. So I think we have to have hope for the future that it's going to help us.
So, I mean, I don't like to be doom and gloom, but all I've heard is what do you call it? The positive, like all I hear is the positivity aspect of all that stuff. What do you think the possible downsides of AI are, like from the extremely bad to the less bad to the annoying?
I mean, the annoying might just be you get the wrong answer to something and you make a decision that's somewhat inconsequential based on what you read, right? Hopefully it doesn't cost you your job, kind of thing. But going further, I mean, the middle of the road spectrum is people using AI to manipulate, to plant stories, to create, fake news. And we talk about that a lot, right? But the quality and the opportunity to do that if somebody could speak eloquently off the cuff based on the current news events. Now, I know ChatGPT is trained a couple of years back at this point, but as it gets more real time, there's the potential that you could have fake news articles generated in moments speaking about a topic that happened just hours ago, and it's planted for disruptive purposes to scare people, to cause panic, to cause runs on banks, and could really be disruptive. All the way through to the worst case. I mean, people talk about the robots are coming, and cyborgs. There's the potential down the road. If AI gets so good, you've got touch sensors and fingers. You can upload. All we are is a brain. You can replace everything else almost as the world goes on. And if AI then can have a brain of a human and can think that way and tap into all our history, is that really going to challenge us? So I sound like, you asked for doom and gloom, I sound like the people who are promoting that side of things, but there is a chance, no matter how small it might be, there is a chance that could be a future. Yeah, exactly.
That Terminator was just a documentary.
Exactly. Scary thought.
Okay, let's go to the positive side. So we were talking about consulting. You have a big background in consulting. I deal with a lot of consulting projects. I have this vision that, like you said, speeding things up, amalgamating data faster, that your people might be scared, oh, hey, how do we stand out? I feel like so many consulting practices have their own base of clients. So from a positive standpoint, I don't think it would change the market hugely unless people decided not to use these tools. Then they would fall behind their competition. But if you already have a base of clients, you're already bringing in new business, and you just use these tools to up your offering and just produce a lot more at the same cost for that client, I just see that as being a net, possibly a really big net positive for those that take advantage of that technology, and apply it in the correct way.
While we talked about the pace of change forever accelerating, this might be an additional accelerant where new products, new features, new capabilities, new lifestyle conveniences could come to market and solve really vexing problems much faster, right?
No, very much so. I mean, to me, the coolest service I can think of, I was like, when Uber and Lyft became popular and people started using that around 2013, that's kind of when I remember it being like, oh wow, people starting to use that. That was a cool application of technology that really was we have all this stuff that's in plain sight, and then those companies decided hey, let's just go for it. And I think there was 10 at first, and then more died and really we just ended up with Uber and Lyft, which really is now just going to probably end up being Uber over time. But I kind of see that now with all these different tools coming out and things like that. It's like the Wild West. Even at that conference, I think there was no shame to them, but there was 5 companies just in that conference. So the best of breed, 5 of the best of breed for data cataloging in the data pipeline. And I'm like, we don't really need this many of you guys. So some of you guys won't be around, won't be coming back next year, or maybe won't make it. But, it's, I think I look at Salesforce. I think somebody used Salesforce as an example there of there was all these CRMs, but really they just kept innovating, kept it going, and just kind of destroyed the competition.
Yeah, I think we're at the cusp of a whole new era as far as AI in business and in life in general. The Ubers of the world were new business models using an existing technology that had enabled them to come to the fore, over the last decade to 2 prior to them launching, right? So the internet's been around, well, I think DARPA put it back out in the middle of the last century, right? But really from a consumer perspective, we've been exposed to it from the mid-90s, probably early 2000s, around the turn of the century. So 25 years, something like that. And now we're moving into this next AI era. And I think the kind of business models it will enable, the kind of change and new conveniences that we think of from an internet age will all be sort of transitional. We'll see that same pattern play out in an AI world.
Hmm. Yeah, that does open up a lot of like what ifs, you know, because maybe the technology will muddle along for like another year and then it'll sort of be so not commoditized. Because I think with like Uber, because you worked in telecoms, it was
Right.
once 4G LTE became possible, that was the
Yeah.
base of like Uber and videos and GIFs and all that crap. Just kind of came at one time.
Right.
Like it didn't exist with 3G, and then all of a sudden that infrastructure change happened, and then that all kind of exploded, and now 5G is
Yeah.
coming. Or
Yeah.
5G is like here, kind of, because it's hard to really execute on on real 5G. It's going to be
An
like
LTE
4G. There's going to
phase,
be like
or
a
yeah.
10-year period because like building out that infrastructure is not easy. You need to get city approvals. You need to make sure that you have power. It's like really
Right.
actually building things. You know, you can't just throw it. It's not like a software update or, you know, a new tool like ChatGPT. Like you need to get people out there physically, like laying wires, putting all this infrastructure
It
up,
does. Yeah.
and that takes time. Um, and I'm kind of curious to see once because I had a guy on the show like a couple like almost 2 months ago, Yatindra, and he worked on CXL infrastructure. So it's like there's all these changes coming at once, and like maybe once this new 5G and this CXL infrastructure is a really just because it exists doesn't mean it's being used. Like once it's like there, like maybe
Right.
70% of the market is now using it, it'll unlock that potential to
Yep.
really explode that.
Example of that is a company I used to work for, Accenture. Right around the turn of the century, somewhere
Oh.
there, the CEO left and started a company called, or didn't start, I think he joined a company that was growing at a time and he scaled it, called Webvan, if anybody remembers that. But it was essentially grocery deliveries, DoorDash, you know, Instacart, etc. But it was ahead of its time, and the infrastructure needed to catch up. So the business model was there, but the capability. So to your point on 5G, 6G after that, uh, that infrastructure needs to
That's
be
true.
there before self-driving cars that are talking to each other and aware of millions of data points on the road, interacting in real time. That capacity needs to be there to really sustain that.
Mm. Well, that's definitely some interesting stuff. And I know being at Kaiser and just other enterprise things move sort of slow. Like, is there any, I don't know, do you see any projects or things coming in the future where you're kind of like excited to work on, you know, that are probably coming through Kaiser or you just are technologies that would sort of excite you to kind of
Well,
get
I think
engaged with?
obviously, again, anything in the AI space, because there are so many business models and opportunities for improvement. I think that would be exciting. But largely digital, not anchoring ourselves to this IT digital shift, but truly enabling, empowering consumer customer interactions on the form factor that they're enjoying.
Mm.
I think there are opportunities there, and that's got to be really exciting to be making a real difference. I think one of the challenges that I have, or one of the frustrations I have rather, is being in IT operations. It's really hard to show the connection to the customer for our teams. And we're always having to draw, I talk about performance management and OKRs, but connecting all the way down to the work the individual does and how it impacts the end customer. When you're so far back from the customer face, that can be frustrating. So to answer the question, then, exciting would be a lot more on the revenue side of the business, a lot closer to the customer, making a difference in the clients and the customer lives through, again, digital AI, the technologies of the future. I think is where a lot of excitement will be these days.
No, that's a good point. And even in my own enterprise and my experiences in the past, you're probably good at this. Sort of cutting through, like literally just going from the back end to the front end and just asking people like, hey, how does this work? Or I'm on the front end and I go to the back end. I'm like, hey, I see this. This is going on. I see this happening. What are you guys working on? And sometimes like in not just here, but other, you know, working at Verizon too, it's like, huh, no
Yeah.
one's ever come to me and asked me that directly. I'm like, yeah. So I'd encourage people in any organization, as long as it's not,
Right. Yeah.
don't get yourself in trouble or something, but there's, no harm in just kind of chatting with people in your own organization, and just from, if you're on the back end, talking to people that are, client facing or consumer facing. And if you're consumer facing, going back and being like, hey, so I'm confused why our system works in this way. And then it can really generate a lot of positive ideas. We've seen like something good, really good can come out of that, but you have to almost adopt that as like your go-to
mindset, yep,
sort of thing. And I don't see
era where technology moves so fast and changes so fast. I mean, the coding languages, the tools of 2 years ago are outdated already. So to anchor yourself around a technical skill is, I think, a very limiting kind of approach. And then likewise, we used to have I this and E that companies, right? That's all gone away because people realize that the internet is inherently it's just another channel in the omni-channel universe. So the same thing, today, business is technology. You can't separate business and technology. Technology is an enabler and part of the business offering. And so being able to speak both business and technology, I think, is critical. You don't have to be an expert on either. Obviously, there are people who are and work in those roles. But if you're really wanting to progress into a management kind of role, I think you have to have a good understanding of both sides. And as you said, be able to draw those lines, connect them for the teams and also for vision. It's a learning environment. Keep reading outside of your particular role in industry so that you can connect the dots.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I mean, I'm more of like an individual contributor role, but I would say that expanded knowledge scope just helps me explain our own processes better to clients. So they're like not confused, or even when people, they're like, they really don't understand. If you understand yourself, I'm definitely not an engineer at heart, but I just generally understand a lot of technology platforms and where they fit in as possible solutions. It's good to bridge that gap. I'd encourage people, whether or not you're in management, it'll just help you feel more satisfied, I think, too, in the work you're doing, because you really kind of get why things are the way they are. And sometimes you ask basic questions, and if the answer is not good, you bring that up. Be like, hey, so I think there's this perception people talked about where every big company like Google and Apple and Accenture, they're all just full of super smart people. Everyone's genius. And like, you really pull back, you go look under the hood, and sometimes you're like, well, there's a lot of opportunities really in any organization, because at the end of the day, we're all human. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's definitely been great having you on. I'm kind of, is there anything maybe that I didn't delve into, or any projects or things that you kind of were looking to sort of go delve into and get my 2 cents on?
Yeah, from a perspective of your 2 cents, Blake, I'd love to tap into your thoughts. You talked about consulting, or I mentioned consulting, and what's your perspective? You have Protiviti. How do you see that industry being impacted, and what is the future of that industry in the current world with AI and technology and the pace of change?
I would say right now, just like short term, the current macroeconomics, like all the hiring freezes, hiring slowdowns. Normally, in this kind of market, I do a lot of contract to hire work. That typically picks up. But what we're seeing is actually a really big push towards not just outsourcing like to another country, but really just outsourcing functions, and really trying to find the best, lowest cost managed solutions provider, which really is something that we weren't expecting. So to give a typical idea, like let's say in an entire year, I would find 2 good opportunities where Protiviti should really engage with a client, do consulting or a managed solution. And just this month, there's been like 5. So I'm kind of like, I joke, or my little tagline is, I'm not a salesperson, I'm a solutions person. So clients bring me a problem. At first, I'm like, oh, this sounds like a staff augmentation. Like, hey, we're building out this API. I'm like, okay, great. Let's bring both the teams, my team, which does staff augmentation, and Protiviti, and discuss your problem with us. They discuss the problem, and we're like, it really sounds like you guys don't want to manage the building of that API.
Right. Yep.
Here you go. And I think that has been interesting for me because I've actually started to learn so much more about the consulting process that I almost feel that I'm not really doing staff augmentation anymore. It's like I'm really like this one-stop shop, and I'm
Solution.
like, hey,
Yeah.
let's discuss your problem. Let's see what you really need. Or I had a client, I'm going to be very opaque because I don't
Sure.
want to get myself in hot water, but they had some IT infrastructure issues, like some severe compliance issues. And they were like really trying to get me to give them a support specialist or an IT manager. And I was like, there is no way I'm giving you a candidate because my candidates will hate me, whoever I place here. And I was like, realistically, it's much better we attack this from a just consulting perspective and really just kind of rip it out from the ground up. Because I knew that short term, would my group make a little bit, higher money? Yeah, but it's not good. And I like Robert Half and Protivity because in many times we'll actually reject projects or engagements. We have the power to reject when it doesn't fit us because we don't want to provide bad solutions for, either the client or the candidate. So people think, oh, it's just, you just get me somebody, you just pop them into a role. It's like, no, I'm basically like, I'm like a connector. So I have to make sure the candidate likes the role, it's the right fit, and everyone matches happy. Because if we make unhappy matches, then we're just not going to have a very sustainable business model.
It's very much a portfolio management kind of mindset, right? Choosing the right projects and saying no or defer others, right? So.
Yeah, I think there's honestly, I'm going to use a little bit of not professional language, but I would say among staff augmentation and some managed solutions, 90% are crap realistically because they're just trying to do all they can to just get a deal. And there's many of these small, medium players that provide okay solutions. And there's like a top 10%, maybe 5-10%, which we sit in, where you're willing to reject business and you're really looking for the solution.
Right.
And I don't see enough of that. And that's the frustrating thing because the market's so polluted with, there's just so many you've worked in consulting, even inside of a large organization, like let's say Accenture, right? It's so massive that there's some amazing teams. And then there's some teams that are like, because they're so big. They're probably like 5 times or 6 times the size of Protivity, for example, overall. And HCL is like a similar, similar mindset, but when you find a good team that gets it done repeatably, it's a good feeling because at the end of the day, you're like, we did that. Like we have like we've rated like a 99.4% success rate or something. Like they've done a statistical breakdown of all our projects, and it's very rare that you can really say like, look at this success rate and hold it up as like a yay. Because I've noticed that I know it's your previous employer, but Accenture and a lot of the Wipro and these other large service providers, they have a portfolio mindset and they're okay with an 83% success rate because they have such a big portfolio that spans the entire globe. It's kind of like, okay, your $500,000 implementation turned into a giant fireball and is causing a bunch of issues. Like, well, that's fine because, we have another 10 projects. Some of them are with, big FANG companies, and it's balanced out in the grand scheme of things. So it's a different
I think
mentality.
There's certainly a niche market there. We've seen a real proliferation of the boutique consulting companies. It used to be boutique strategic consultants, and then it became boutique strategic implementers, partners, to your point, right? And there are just a handful of those who I really trust and would go back to and use. But it's interesting comment you make about the shift that you're seeing to managed solutions, and it almost sounds like there's a shift from the big outsourcing to almost like micro outsourcing or micro managed solutions in niche areas, right? And it comes down to, like you said, problem solving. As a trained civil structural engineer, I see myself as a builder, whether it's building a process, building a company, building people, building solutions, problem solving. And I think those are the kind of skills that are critical these days. And companies are obviously looking for them because of, as you say, the shift towards solve my problem without committing me to a 10-year, multi-billion-dollar outsourcing deal, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And actually, there was a really interesting speaker. He's the head of, I think it was shared services for Coke One North America. So he was talking about like this modern solutions, and he was talking more about like data infrastructure, data stack, like having a really modern solution would have the ability to scale up and scale down in real time as needed. And that's a thing that I see kind of changing. So a lot of my selling point to clients is like, hey, you can scale this up. You can get as many resources, dump on as many as you want, and even outsource these functions, especially in a lot of the IT stuff like 24-hour help desk, things like that. Or you can scale it down. You can say like, okay, you know what? We don't want to do any hiring. We have a set budget. This is what we're working with. And then, okay, maybe there's some privacy issues. Maybe there's some regulation. Like I work with a lot of biotech similar to Kaiser. And then it's like, well, we really need to manage that in-house. And, you know, it's really just whatever's going to work best. And it's kind of fun in my mind when I can actually come in, make that solution, be like, hey, you know, you had this problem, we got that solution. And then they're like, oh, here's another problem. And I'm like,
that's
okay, here's another solution.
The idea of focusing on core differentiators, right? What really makes the company different? What's its real value add? And they could partner, whether it's long-term outsourcing, managed solutions short-term, but they could partner on the rest, right? Makes them more nimble, especially in times of change like this. They don't have to commit staff and benefits to a long-term direction that could change on a dime.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's just so many. Yeah, I was having like big long conversations. There was a startup founder from like Copenhagen that was there, and I was just explaining like, especially when the contract to hire route, it's like there's like different methodologies, and so if we all are on the same page, I think that's like key. Like we all have to be on the same page, have the same goal, and then I'll make sure that we get you that solution. Where if we're not clear about what we really want, that's kind of like where I was talking about before. Like that's where the problems start. If the end goal isn't clear. So like if we're going to bring on a contractor, it's usually for some kind of project. There's an issue. Somebody just leaves. They're like, I'm quitting. And actually that's one of the implementations we're sort of working with Kaiser is just in case people leave, where there's like a backup resource, to help staff these projects. But then I was talking with a client this morning. They're like, hey, we are more contract to hire. We just want to see somebody's output before we make that commitment. And that's a completely different methodology. But then sometimes, you get a contractor out there and you're like, wow, this person's just a beast. Like I want them on my team. They can, as long as the person wants to, we're like, yeah, go for it. Do your thing. Yeah. But that's me shamelessly giving a plug to myself and my team.
It's worth it.
Thank you. But yeah, I want to thank you for coming on, and definitely it was really interesting kind of talking about your background in healthcare and especially the consulting piece, just because I don't know, maybe people will watch this and I've noticed that being a really big trend lately. So it's connecting it to the hands on the ground business work.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for the opportunity. Great chatting with you, Blake, and look forward to keeping in touch as you progress here. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Thank you, Ken.
You too. Take care.
Have a good day, okay?